A grim anniversary for Myanmar. Since a military takeover 1 year ago, at least 1,500 civilians have been killed, thousands more arrested, and millions need humanitarian assistance. As violence worsens, is the international community powerless to stop it? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is the first anniversary of Myanmar's military coup. On February 1st, 2021, Myanmar's fledgling democracy was bludgeoned into submission by its military. Since then, the country's de facto leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, has been charged with multiple crimes, convicted, and sentenced to prison, technically disqualifying her from ever holding public office again. In response, some Western countries, including Australia, the US, UK, and Canada, have pressed on with sanctions against Myanmar's military as well as judicial officials involved in prosecutions. That includes the junta's attorney general. Earlier, Commander-in-Chief Min Aung Hlaing and leading members of the junta had been hit with sanctions as well. But beyond that censure, there's been little appetite for greater diplomatic pressure. Anti-coup activists organized a silent strike across major cities to mark the first anniversary, and a small group of protesters was brave enough to take to the streets in Yangon. Dozens of other activist leaders were preemptively detained by the junta. Though their desire for change has not diminished, fear of reprisal has kept many others off the streets.
Youths in Myanmar experienced the taste of freedom and technology in recent years, and we only want to follow this way. We don't want to jump down the dark hole again. If we are living under the military council, our souls will be that. We won't have any opportunities, any chances in our lives.
After 1 year since the coup, in Myanmar we still have many people being killed every single day by the military, and the world is not watching. The military council is still committing crimes against humanity, like arresting civilians, burning villages during the war with People's Defense Forces in ethnic areas. We are still facing torture, killing, and oppression.
As long as impunity prevails, stability in Myanmar will be a fiction. Accountability of the military remains crucial to any solution going forward, and the people overwhelmingly demand this.
Let's take a look at some of the dates and numbers in Myanmar. The military coup on February 1st last year ended 10 years of a fledgling democracy. Nobel laureate Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy party had won a landslide in elections just a few months before. Today, she's facing up to 173 years in prison if she's found guilty of all legal cases pending against her. In the violent clashes that followed the coup, over 1,500 people have been killed. Almost 12,000 anti-coup activists have been arrested. The World Bank says Myanmar's economy has shrunk by 30% in the last year. So 1 year after the military takeover, is there any hope for Myanmar's transition to democracy? To talk more about that, I am joined from Geneva by Hnin. She's an officer at Burma Campaign UK and also the daughter of detained democracy activist Mya Ai, who was arrested when the coup began. Maung Zarni joins us from London. He's the Burmese co-founder of Forces of Renewal, Southeast Asia. And from Bangkok is Phil Robertson, the Deputy Asia Director of Human Rights Watch. Thanks all so much for being with us. Phil, let me start with you because we spoke a year ago when all this first happened. A panelist actually on the opposite side of you had said the coup was justified because there had been election fraud. And at any rate, he said a new election would be held to rectify the wrongs that had been committed. So has anything in the past year led you to believe that things could return to where they were?
Not really. I think the situation has gone well beyond that. The military continues to perpetrate this fiction of electoral fraud as a way to target the National League for Democracy, which won the November 2020 election. But the situation on the ground, with the resistance of the people through the nonviolent civil disobedience movement and also increasingly through armed action and insurrection in the cities and the countryside by the People's Defense Forces, indicates that the people of Myanmar have really gone beyond the idea of just waiting around for another election and allowing the military to go back to its position of an overlord in the Myanmar politics. I think that the people of Myanmar want the military out of politics, and they actually want to see significant systematic reform of the military. The rights abuses that have occurred are so grave and are so systematic and continuous also that we need to see international prosecutions of Senior General Min Aung Hlaing and other top policymakers in the military junta for the crimes of against humanity that they have committed. It is a very drastically changed situation from a year ago.
But that's part of the problem, is it not, Phil? Because the longer the military does hold on to power, the more people accuse it of various human rights violations. So it becomes scarier and scarier for them to talk about ceding power back to the democratically elected government if they are in fear of being held to account.
Well, there's going to be international accountability one way or another. The reality is you can't do these kind of things and expect that you're just going to get away with it. And the situation on the ground very well may change. I think that we may see, cracks within the military. We're going to see hopefully more international pressure, hopefully something on oil and gas sector coming soon. There has to be a ratcheting up of pressure by the international community that complements the ongoing resistance of the people in Myanmar and goes beyond just statements of solidarity, but recognizes that, this battle is something really that is going for the heart of what the future Myanmar will look like.
Okay. Hnin, let me ask you this. I want to step back for a second and talk again briefly about the supposed election. Right now we're ready for another 6 months of a state of emergency. That's been extended. Elections that were supposed to be held in 2022 now are supposed to be held in 2023. Do you have any confidence that they will be held and that there is still a path to getting your democracy back through the ballot box?
Well, I don't know who they're trying to fool because there is, even if they're trying to hold the sham election, no one will be participating. And the other point I want to make is that Burma never had a genuine democracy. Burma never had true democracy, even with the reforms and changes that we saw in the past 10 years, because ethnic nationalities in my country were continuing to be attacked and killed by the military. And there was a genocide of the Rohingya in 2017, and very little accountable or justice done, of course. That kind of created a sense of impunity for the military. So they are now thinking, okay, we can kill as many people as we want, we can arrest as many people as we want, but if we say we're going to hold the election in a 6 month or a year time, the international community will fall for it. So I think international community has the duty to end this cycle of impunity. And past year has shown that the military is not something we can have an engagement with. Military is something, they don't respect human rights or democratic values at all. So I am personally, I'm not interested in election, and I don't believe in any words that military says.
Let me ask you, though, are you fearing at all that people might be starting to accept the status quo in Myanmar, that their spirit has been broken in a sense, that the fear of reprisal is too great, so that the uprisings we saw, the mass civil disobedience will fade away and the military will feel that, its crackdown has won?
No, because it's been a year. We can say that the military hasn't been able to consolidate power because people are resisting in many ways possible. They are, organizing strikes in a creative way. Okay, we don't see thousands of people mass protesting on the street in city areas, but people are still protesting in a flash mob style or other creative style. And today, one of the protests was a silent strike, and the whole country took part. Most people, apart from the military supporters group, of course, but it shows that resistance is growing and determination to uproot this military is stronger than ever. So it doesn't matter how much violence the military instill, but people are still stronger and people are still winning this revolution.
Okay, Maung Zarni, we've just heard our two other panelists allude to the fact that the international community holds a lot of the power right now to make whatever change might be possible in Myanmar actually come to fruition. What do you think just needs to be done, to put it in the simplest terms possible? What steps can be taken, particularly by the international community right now, to get Myanmar back to where so many Myanmaris want it to be?
Well, I mean, before any one of us can suggest what the international community should or should not do, to address the growing revolutionary movement or crisis, if you will, we need to understand what it is that we are looking at. I mean, basically, I want to pick up on what Phil said, rather approvingly. He used the word resistance. That is precisely correct. What we are looking at is not just simply protest movement, like street protest, creative protest, silent protest, the different forms of protest and whatnot. We are looking at essentially not even opposition against the coup. We're looking at, revolutionary movement, organic, and from within, the mainstream Burmese society across different classes, doctors, engineers, like, working laborers and even well-to-do families. This is akin to a fascist occupation being resisted across the Nazi-occupied Europe or Burma in 1944-45 against the fascist Japanese occupation. So if we get this, analysis correct, then we can start looking at what the international community or the UN and others can do. What they must not be allowed to do is to come in with the discourse of appeasement. The military must be engaged. The military has to be at the dialogue. No one in their right mind in 1945 would suggest that, the international community engage with the Nazis and the Hitler. That is where Burma today is. We are looking at a revolutionary movement. We're also looking at a social revolution. The revolution is not led by Aung San Suu Kyi or the old guards from the National League for Democracy, from our party. It is led by the new generation, much younger than many of us. And they want an inclusive society, and they are also pushing for a social revolution. And so these things are very important to keep in mind before we suggest what international community should do.
Okay, so Phil, I mean, Maung Zarni thinks this comes down to just getting the correct analysis before a real approach is decided. But I want to look, we asked our viewers actually to reach out to us before entering this discussion and let us know some of their thoughts. Kin HM actually simply put, she says, we acknowledge the international community's efforts, but it's not enough to prevent unnecessary deaths of innocent citizens. We Myanmar people know not to expect much from the world, but just wish to get tangible support to restore democracy as soon as possible. So again, we're hearing that something has to come from the outside in. They need support. They need help. So tell me, Phil, if you had, the proverbial magic geopolitical wand, what would you do to sort out the situation?
Well, I mean, from the international side, the first thing I would do is break the deadlock at the UN Security Council and break the resistance of China and Russia to any action on Myanmar. I would, immediately have them push through a global arms embargo that would cut off all arms to the Myanmar military junta. I would have them vote to refer the situation in Myanmar and of its top leaders to the International Criminal Court for prosecution based on crimes against humanity. And I would ask the international community, particularly from the UN Security Council, to consider things like no-fly zones or responsibility to protect, because we're dealing with the kind of rights violations here by a military that is systematic and pervasive. It's occurring all over the country. And, where there is a complete and total failure by a government or a regime like this one to protect the rights of its people, the responsibility to protect doctrine calls on the international community to play a role in doing that. And that
Phil,
would
sorry-
be the
sorry
kind
to-
of
sorry to
magic
interrupt.
wand I would hope to have these things done.
Okay.
But, I don't expect any of
I
that to
think,
happen.
Maung Zarni, go ahead.
Phil, sorry. Yeah, I think Phil, I agree what should be done at the Security Council, but it is utterly, impossible for China and USA, to side with the US and the China and Russia to side with the with any one of the Western the powers, simply because
Oh, I agree.
more than 80% of the arms that supply to the Burmese military come from China and Russia. And then, if we look at the Ukraine scenario, and then, the bilateral conflict that is emerging between China and the USA. So, whatever the US or any other, pro-democracy, supporter on the Security Council will say, well, neither countries would do. So we have to look at the neighbors, like Bangladesh, the Thailand. I mean, even seemingly insignificant things like, letting the Burmese refugees come and dissidents take refuge in neighboring countries and allowing them, to empower themselves through whatever means. Those are the, steps that will not get headline news, but that will, practically help the Burmese resistance. So we need to shift the focus on the resistance. I mean, focus
Okay.
on the international community to the focus on how do we strengthen the hands of resistance. That should be driving the international community's policies.
Understood. Phil, is that fair? I mean, we have to look beyond the UN Security Council because that just simply won't work. So to look at, on a micro level, supporting resistance movements in Myanmar, which can also be dangerous. You're talking effectively about arming certain groups. But is it the only way?
Well, look, as a human rights group, I'm not going to be stepping up to support the arming of resistance groups. I mean, what I can say is there is a strong support within the international community now for cross-border humanitarian assistance. There needs to be pressure on Thailand to accept that. There needs to be pressure on India to accept that. What various different governments decide to do in terms of supporting the resistance will be up to them. We have not seen much of that kind of support going to the resistance, to the PDFs or to the ethnic armed organizations that are in Myanmar. Maybe that will change. But, our view is that, if we had a magic wand, as your question posed to me, that would be what we would want.
And it was a hypothetical question in your defense.
We need to have substantive pressure at the international community. And I think that what is immediately accomplishable by the international community is effective sanctions, for instance, against oil and gas. Because when Total Energies and Chevron pull out of Myanmar 6 months from now, they're just going to hand over the keys to other companies that will continue business as usual, unless there are sanctions against the oil and gas revenues that prevent that money from going into the coffers of the Myanmar military junta.
Right. Hnin, I saw you nod your head there. I assume you think that is the most effective and straightforward way to have some effect on the military leaders.
Yes, I mean, as much as we like to have a magic wand, we don't, right? So there are so many effective actions and in so many different ways. So economic, diplomatic, legal, or humanitarian. And the international community can use all of those to put effective action against the Burmese military. And like Phil said, one Total and Chevron pull out, the revenue will continue because other companies from Russia and China will come in, and the Burmese military will still have money to buy weapons. So, okay, the UNSC might be a problem for the global arms embargo, but the countries they have an ability to impose arms embargo unilaterally. So rather than arguing about what they can and they can't do, or there are so many ways we can apply pressure on the Burmese military, and that's what we've been doing.
I think, like Winnie, we've got to look at it, economically. Global economy is no longer in the hands of like a rich Western nations, United States or the European.
No one is
the
saying
Union
that.
countries.
I wasn't saying that. No.
No. What I'm saying is, like,
I was pointing out about the different tools that the international community can use to put pressure on the Burmese military.
I think it's still wrong. Let me say this. Like, we are looking at a revolutionary movement, and the focus has to be the Burmese people. This question of, like, what should outsiders do should be secondary. The primary force of the change in Burma is
let's not misunderstand each other. She's not saying that wasn't an option. But Wei Nin, if I can ask you something else, because I put this to Phil very briefly, and I would like to get your take on it as well, because there is this threat looming over the military junta that they will be prosecuted. The human rights abuses are many. These leaders will looking at years and years and years in prison for the kinds of abuses that have been potentially committed here. So would you accept, and knowing what your father in particular has been through and is still going through in Myanmar as a prisoner of the junta, would you accept negotiations for, I don't know, some kind of amnesty at some point? Because if they're going to be literally fighting for their lives, they will fight to whatever bitter end. What would you feel would be acceptable to negotiate with the military in order to get them eventually to maybe hand over power, or at least back to the elected leaders that are there?
As I mentioned before, the military is not something you engage with or negotiate with because they don't respect human rights or democratic values at all. Of course, they are scared of going on the International Criminal Court or being held accountable, but they should be held accountable for atrocities that they have committed, not just since 1st of February last year, but since many decades against ethnic nationalities. And they should be held accountable and they should be on trial. And it doesn't matter about people being released with amnesty or not. And also, the other thing is that we, as long as the military is there, we will never be able to achieve genuine federal democracy in the country. And coming back to the point before is, I wasn't, the Burmese people are the focus. And when we are talking about international community, we are merely asking the international community to do their duty because people inside the country are risking their lives. They are going out, protesting, they are resisting against the military, and the least they deserve is some support from the international community. No one is putting them in a secondary position at all.
Right, understood. Phil, I mean, we talk about the international community, and one of the biggest players, as we know, is China. That does tacitly support the military junta. If somehow China were able to stop that support, would the junta fall apart? Would that be the biggest, most powerful first step to be taken?
I'm not sure that there's going to be a one international factor that's going to cause the junta to fall. I think that what you're seeing is a growing resistance. You're seeing increased pressure on the military because they are so hated within Myanmar's society. You're seeing targeting of various different informer networks and others that is making it more difficult for them to operate. All these things are having a direct impact on the ability of the junta, and we're seeing, increased defections, although, they're still at a fairly low level in terms of the ranks of the people coming across. China is going to go whatever way it thinks is going to win. China's interest is maintaining their economic corridor. And they didn't have a problem with Aung San Suu Kyi in the first place. They were getting everything they wanted from the National League for Democracy government. And to be honest, I think that they, if they feel that they're going to get the same thing from the Myanmar junta, they would support the junta. But what they really want is stability, and I think that they're viewing the situation as being one where, because of this coup, there is no social political stability in the country anymore, and that their investments are at risk. And so they're looking for a way out. And if they see an opportunity to support one side that is going to guarantee their investments and guarantee their interests in Myanmar, they may continue, they'll support them, or they may change sides. We'll see how it plays. I mean, China's watching this very closely. They're staying in touch with all sides, not only with the junta, but also I think with the opposition, as they've done in the past. They're not going to allow anything to surprise them.
Phil, that will have to be the final word. I'd like to thank really all three of my panelists so much for being with us on this edition of The Newsmakers, and our viewers, of course, for tuning in as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter at @the_newsmakers, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.